Former MP, Harin Fernando. Now, he claimed that the government was using Pegasus spyware in Sri Lanka. Now, few questions. We'll start with, in your opinion, I know this is a loaded question.
I'm happy to answer.
Is there a chance it's being used in Sri Lanka?
You're putting me in trouble, but I'm happy to answer.
Yeah. Question number one. But a lot of criminal networks around the world, they're using the darknet now to kind of, that's like the marketplace. That's where they're exchanging payments for weapons and, maybe other illicit services. It could be indecent images. It could be a whole range, even murder for hire. On the darknet. Are we doing enough? Do we know if Sri Lanka, are we paying attention to that space?
We should do more.
Hey guys, thank you for joining us on the hot seat. This is Lloyd and I've got a special guest here with me virtually in the studio. We're going to be talking about Pegasus spyware. We're going to be talking about the darknet. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity and a whole bunch of things. We've got Asela Waidyalankara, who is the country director for Comsec. Now, you are a veteran in the IT field, cybersecurity. Asela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sri Lanka Insurance Motor Plus, driven by you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Now, Asela, being a cybersecurity expert and given your line of work, can you take us through what a typical day is like for you? What do you do? What takes up most of your brain time?
Thank you. Interesting question. No one's really asked me like that. But a typical day is mostly meeting people. Meeting industry leaders, CEOs, managing directors, boards of directors, because the idea is to convince them to invest in cybersecurity, to educate them on cybersecurity, enlighten them sometimes on the threats that are out there, what's happening in a wider sense globally, and how that could impact an organization or an individual. So that sort of takes the greater part of my day, but most importantly, people have given me the honor of, being their trusted advisor when it comes to cybersecurity. So that's a title I take very, very seriously. It's an honor, but also it's something that keeps me up at night as well, because I have to be honest and forthcoming in my advice. So that's ideally that's what would take most of my brain time, if I'm being honest, honestly.
Because I picture you walking into work and you've got all these screens in front of you, like the movies, and boss, we've got a hack, we need to sort this out. But now, speaking of national things, Asela, something else now, I'm seeing more of this around the world, where they're seeing that the darknet, this is a real thing. Again, for those of you that have no idea, there is an underbelly on the, because it's a bit like the internet. But a lot of criminal networks around the world, they're using the darknet now to kind of, that's like the marketplace. That's where they're exchanging payments for weapons and, maybe other illicit services. It could be indecent images. It could be a whole range, even murder for hire on the darknet. Are we doing enough? Do we know if Sri Lanka, are we paying attention to that space?
We should do more, as always. Are we paying attention to that space? Well, yes and no. We are paying attention at a level where we can, for example, I know CERT is doing some work on this, where if there is, for example, chatter on a government website, and this is how they actually discover that certain websites have been hacked or certain websites have been compromised, because they do find out, they go to these darknet forums and they pick up the chatter, especially on Sri Lanka. So we call that, in our line of business, we call it cyber threat intelligence. So it's sort of the same thing that intelligence services do, where you scour the darknet in these forums and you wait for crumbs of information. So they do that at a certain level, but certainly we need to do more. Now, for example, this year, the Global Cybersecurity Index was published. That's a UN report. And Sri Lanka is ranked 82. If you take all the SAARC countries, we're the lowest ranked. There are a few African countries that are ahead of us. We shouldn't look down on African countries, because actually the space that they operate now is far more advanced and far more mature than we ever could imagine. So we are slipping behind. I would like to, again, this has a whole heap of investments that would go into it. And you made a very, very valid point. I see a lot of investments being done on digitization. I mean, we have a conversation where the president himself has said we are going to invest in a national digital ID, something similar to what ADA is happening in India. That's all very good. We have to move forward. We have to digitize. That's the only way we leapfrog into a more mature, more developed status. But while doing that, what I always urge authorities, whenever I go for these discussions, is please have the same amount of focus on the security as well. It's always better to invest in the security from the onset rather than have these systems, get them compromised, and then realize it's a big hole in it, and then try to invest in security, because obviously then there's no tender you can do, or no box or tool you can just buy and make this go away, because that's not inherently how this space operates. And this is where, like you correctly said, all our data, if it's going to be online, our deeds, our ID, our driving license, our inland revenue details, everything that's important to us, it's going to be lodged in an online cyberspace. Then let's make it secure, just like we make a physical building secure. Definitely. I mean, you will have all these government buildings, they're always going to be a security guard outside, right? There's going to be some sort of security apparatus outside, meaning that you've invested in that. So let's, in the same way, let's invest in cybersecurity. That's what I urge all the time when I initiate these discussions.
Should Facebook and some of these social media platforms start verifying accounts by ID, or at least by some legal information, so it gives people that level of accountability?
What you must understand is inherently these platforms are not based in Sri Lanka, so they're not going to be consistent with Sri Lankan laws, Sri Lankan regulations, because I know there are instances where law enforcement legitimately wants to get in touch with Facebook, legitimately wants information. Still, there's been a lag, and the reason I say is because most of these entities are based in the United States, so they're very big on personal liberty, personal freedom, and on anonymity that comes from which is understandable, but therein inherently there are security concerns, there are other concerns, there are hate speech concerns, misinformation, disinformation concerns as well. But on the other end of the spectrum, do you muzzle people's freedom of expression, creativity? Because sometimes people are creative, are better expressing themselves when they're behind not a fake profile, but let's say a parody profile. So it's a fine line to take, and
I know.
If you just leave that up to one entity to decide, be it the state or be it some agency, then it might be arbitrary. So what you need is a more holistic view of this. Certainly there needs to be laws in place to tackle hate speech, which is a no-no, which we need to really look at, especially with tech companies like Facebook, Instagram, and all the other social media companies, because it's happening at scale. And because these companies can't really decode hate speech happening in native languages, especially Sinhalese or Tamil. So this is a challenge that they're having. So then therefore, we have to have a bridging mechanism where we step in and say, okay, this is hate speech, we're flagging that, please take it down. So that sort of understanding needs to come in. I know the relationship with Facebook has improved after, we see unfortunate incidents like the Digana riots that were initiated, planned, and sometimes executed using Facebook. And there is documented evidence on that. So much so that there was a UN report that identified Facebook as one of the factors that created the atmosphere for some of those unfortunate incidents to happen. So you see the part they play, and you need to come in. But again, if you just start doing one aspect of it, just checking people, and that entire creativity, that entire ecosystem might break down, because people are more freer to express themselves when they feel there is no big brother looking over them. Which is why I think even what you mentioned earlier, Pegasus sort of freaked everybody out, but we'll get to that. So it's a fine line that you have to take, and it's a more holistic measure that you have to take. Locally, we have to have this education of people. Again, we're coming back to educating people. We're coming back to telling them how they need to have, what conversations they need to have online, what conversations they need to have offline. which is, I feel, where people lose the plot.
Yeah.
You've seen how these comment wars get out of hand, because listen, and I'm telling it right out there, no one's changing their mind on Facebook because you all get into an argument. Please
keep your opinions.
keep your opinion. No one's changing their mind. Chances are, off chance, you will just maybe see things a different way, but that's an off chance. More likely, you'll just get more.
You're upsetting people more than anything.
You're upsetting people. You're spoiling their day, and you'll get more entrenched in your ideas, and you're set in your ways versus actually having a more open conversation. Because I always feel when you have face-to-face conversation, when you have an offline conversation, it's always better versus some of these online conversations. Because I've done that where people who have really fought online and you brought them together and said, okay, talk, and they've been really laid back and very cool about it. So I think that's what we need to focus on versus perhaps trying to be putting regulations and trying to control the thing.
Right. Speaking of privacy, now Pegasus spyware, this has been a concerning thing. India, they had protests, with people claiming that the government were spying on journalists, lawmakers, the opposition, the public. Can you first tell us now we'll get to Pegasus in Sri Lanka, but what exactly is Pegasus spyware? What kind of information does it grant access to?
Well, Pegasus spyware is something very interesting. I would call it a tool or a piece of technology that an intelligence agency will use to eavesdrop on you. It's a sort of a cyber eavesdropping tool. So Pegasus is a very mature product because it's not been around this year, last year. It's been around for a while. And as we've seen it grow, it has matured on its capability, what it can do. And right now, what it can do is literally what we call without getting into too much technical jargon, it's called a zero-click attack. Okay. Meaning now, there are times we've seen where you get questionable links and your phishing emails or your spam emails, and if you click on that link, you're in trouble. So like that, they will try to gain access to the device by sending you something that more likely you will click on. Let's say a credit card offer or something that looks very mundane, but you click on it and your device is compromised. What these guys have done is they've taken it a step further and done something called a zero-click attack, because they've used certain vulnerabilities existing in the code of iPhones, of WhatsApp, and so on and so forth, which are not in public disclosed. So we call these 0 days because it's not known. Even the manufacturer or the person making that software doesn't know there is a vulnerability in their code that we call that a 0 days. So these guys have used a couple of these 0 days, stitched it together and made this solution or made this technology. And the scary part is that the target device can be compromised on a WhatsApp call, missed call. You don't need to even answer the call.
That's it, and you're in.
And you're in. And that could be iMessage, that could be a WhatsApp message, and then literally you're in.
You don't have to approve or click yes on anything.
No, nothing.
That's it.
Nothing. And this is where people have been startled. And then from that point, your WhatsApp conversations, basically your gallery, you can remotely on and off your microphone and your camera, take photographs, be aware of your location. Literally, your device is compromised, your conversations are compromised, and basically you're looking at the person looking at you has a treasure trove of information that they can gather and look at it from like a reporting format and gather information about you. For example, if it's Lloyd, where have you been in the morning? Where did you stop? Who did you on at 8:09? Who did you WhatsApp and what was their response? So all of that comes in a neat little report format, and then you can look at it for intelligence purposes, ideally.
Incredible. Okay, so my question is, now earlier in March this year, we had a former MP, Harin Fernando. Now he claimed that the government was using Pegasus spyware in Sri Lanka. Now, few questions. We'll start with, in your opinion, I know this is a loaded question. I'm
happy to answer.
Is there a chance it's being used in Sri Lanka?
You're putting me in trouble, but I'm happy to answer.
Yeah. Question number one. Is there a chance it's being used in Sri Lanka?
Okay. So thank you. I'll first answer that question. So if you look at the recent revelations of Pegasus, you have to understand why. And I'm going to answer this question on evidence-based in the public domain.
Yeah.
So for example, there might be information you or I are aware of, which may change this answer completely. So you have to be aware of that when I'm answering. So this entire situation came to light is because Amnesty International, with the help of another agency called Citizen Lab, which is an NGO that looks at digital rights, privacy, etc., they got together and they analyzed the NSO code and they analyzed some devices and they found how to detect the NSO Pegasus vulnerability being there. And then they ran an entire extensive digital forensics for all these devices and then for all these other countries. And they managed to have I think it's a 30-40 page huge report, very comprehensive, very detailed, that identified heads of states, human rights activists, the head of the WHO, the French president, Prime Minister Imran Khan, so many people, the list goes on. And they've identified all these people. Now, my question to you is, Amnesty International has always kept a very close eye on Sri Lanka. And the question you have to ask yourself is, if Sri Lanka was mentioned even fleetingly, or if there was any digital evidence that said that Sri Lankan forces or Sri Lankan journalists or any other human rights defenders in the country were exposed, they would have found out immediately because of the comprehensiveness of that report. It is not me saying that. It is anyone can look at that report. It's very comprehensive. They've laid out the technical aspects of it. And that report identifies the countries that Pegasus has been used. Sri Lanka is not mentioned in that list. That is number one. Number two, you must understand how NSO operates. NSO is the company that sells Pegasus. NSO Group is a company based in Israel. Mm-hmm. And any sale that they do has to be vetted and cleared by the Israeli Defense Ministry, not the Sri Lankan Defense Ministry, not Sri Lanka, the Israeli Defense Ministry. And if you take the list of countries that have indeed purchased Pegasus or is using Pegasus, you see mostly are Western allies, meaning which is why Israeli Defense Ministry were able to give that green light, because obviously it was to allies.
Yes.
And also this type of cyber weapon is equivalent to having a nuclear weapon. So we know that by restriction, Sri Lanka is restricted to acquire certain military capabilities, be it cyber or otherwise.
Right.
So that being said, I really have my reservations that the Israeli Defense Ministry will grant us approval, even if we wanted to purchase it, grant us approval because of the other underlying political issues they'll have to face if they do grant us approval.
Okay.
Thirdly, and finally, Lloyd, these systems are not cheap. They start, what I'm told, the grapevine I am hearing, it starts 10, 15, 20 million dollars. And if you do the math, that runs into billions and billions of rupees.
Yeah.
Which at the moment, I don't think we're financially capable of undertaking that. But also don't forget, it's not only purchasing this software, there is service agreements, there are support agreements, so many. It's like getting any other software. So those also run into the millions of dollars. Right. Millions of dollars means a lot of rupees. And right now, I really don't think we're financially capable of absorbing such a cost, because if you look at the other countries, they're fairly affluent and they can buy these kind of systems. So on those evidence, of those three evidences I brought out to you, I'm going to say no. We don't have it. But that being said, I want to be very careful here because I don't want to be misquoted. That does not mean that the agencies or the Sri Lankan state can get some other tool that does something similar.
To make
not the same, but similar, which we are not ruling that out. But right now, Pegasus.
Thank you. I hope I didn't fry your brain this morning. But thank you so much for your expertise, for making the time for us and the conversation. I'm sure I'll touch back. I'll touch base with you again, because seemingly this is a brewing topic. The topic of foreign intelligence in Sri Lanka, spyware, privacy, and I'm sure these things are going to really come to the forefront in the coming years. And I'm sure I'll hit you up soon enough. But thank you so much for your time.
It's always my pleasure, and thank you for having me. And one closing remark. Now we spoke about Pegasus. Tomorrow, Pegasus, of course, I think is on its way down. The officers are rated by the Israeli Defense Ministry, so maybe their days are numbered.
Yeah.
But tomorrow there might be another Pegasus, and we might not even know about it. But more importantly, and I think I want to thank you also for initiating this conversation. The conversation around security, privacy, that has to be a sustained conversation that needs to happen with people, along with educating them. And I wish and hope that everybody, including your news agency, take this task and run with it, because this is what is required right now in the country. But so thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And there you have it, the hot seat with Asela Waidyalankara, Country Director for Comsec. And we hope we answered all the questions you had in mind. We'd love to know, who would you like to see featured on the hot seat? Drop it in the comments below. Be sure to like and share the video. The hot seat brought to you by Sri Lanka Insurance.
Sri Lanka Insurance Motor Plus, driven by you.